Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Happy Thursday, or if you're on the other side of the date line, I guess happy Friday, but it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around all of that. So let's just say happy Thursday and welcome. So my name is Barclay Blair, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Information Governance Initiative. And today you're going to listen to the latest in our series of webinars with ZyLAB, addressing some of the emerging and most challenging issues and solutions to those issues around information governance. ZyLAB is a charter supporter of the Information Governance Initiative, which is a think tank that focuses on advancing the practice and the technologies behind information governance. So we're going to have a great discussion today. Let's talk about who we are with today. Our first speaker today is going to be Bennet Borden, who is co-founder with me at the Information Governance Initiative, and is, as far as we know, the world's first chief data scientist at a major law firm at Drinker Biddle. Bennet and I founded the Information Governance Initiative a couple years ago because we really saw an opportunity for information governance to emerge as a standard practice in the way that we not only, of course, minimize risk associated with information, but also maximize its value. And Bennet has really put that into practice by studying and becoming an expert on the analytics side of information, which, of course, is a key tool and a key method for how we're going to do both of those things. So welcome today, Bennet.
Thanks very much, Barclay. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Our next speaker is Johannes, who is from ZyLAB, as I said, and we're very grateful from the beginning. ZyLAB has been a great supporter of our research and activities, and he's a chairman and chief strategy officer there, and has, I think, a really interesting and insightful vision for where we're going with cloud computing, what that means for electronic discovery, and for information governance. And you can see some of his credentials here on your screen. Also someone who has studied the use of advanced technology to try and help us go after these problems. So welcome, Jan. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yep, thank you.
Excellent. So from a high level, what our speakers are going to talk about today is some of the challenges of moving to the cloud. Obviously, the cloud has become a standard part of the discussion that pretty much every organization of any size, including very small organizations for whom, of course, service delivery of IT to the cloud is ideal, but all the way up to very large organizations who are radically altering the nature of their information infrastructure to take advantage of what the cloud has to offer. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what it means for electronic discovery. Electronic discovery being a very challenging set of activities, even when you have the data in your own data center. So what does it mean when that data is not in your direct care, custody, or control, and what that looks like? We'll look at some of the specific issues that arise in Azure and Microsoft's platform, and how you can go after those issues with ZyLAB's capabilities, look at some use cases, and we'll have some time for question and answer. So by the way, if please ask questions as we go along. Use the chat function that you see in your console to ask a question, and as time allows, we'll get to as many of those at the end as we can, and if not, we'll follow up via email with those as well. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Bennet. Take it away.
Thanks, Barclay. I appreciate that. So this is a pretty exciting topic for us. It's a very interesting development in computer science and in the information governance in the last many years here. Of course, all of us we know what's driving the cloud, right? The fact that there is the ability to stand up and take down and augment and reduce resources in the cloud, computing resources in the cloud, through a third party. So you've got the ability to stand up resources, to take down resources, to change them depending on the objectives and requirements of your particular business. And it's also, this is really interesting parallel to what happens in most technology as it's developed. There's a great book called The Big Switch by Nicholas Carr that the second edition just came out earlier this year. Really interesting book that compares the spread of electrification, so the production and distribution of electricity, to the production and distribution of computational resources. And it's a very interesting book because it really tracks what's going on with the spread of cloud computing, because basically, factories and companies used to create their own electricity and had generators way back, right? And then it got to the point, well, it made more sense to have the electricity created somewhere else and distributed, so that my use could change. I didn't have to have specialists on site who are great at building generators and things like that and maintaining them. And that's what's happening in the computational resource area. So many companies find it much more efficient and less costly to, instead of having giant data centers that they maintain and dealing with software upgrades and all of that, that instead they outsource all that basically to a cloud computing environment. And so the convenience and utility, the cost involved and the elasticity is really what drives most of these decisions around the cloud. The problem with that, of course, is that you still have these significant duties about the control of your information. Just because the data is in a different place and even in the possession of a third party, it doesn't change our legal responsibilities about those things. And so all of us in different industries face a wide array of regulations. We have business requirements, regulatory requirements, and then litigation or other legal requirements. And so this is where we are seeing most of the struggle, is how do we change our thinking so that our information governance programs extend to all the data that is within our control regardless of where it lives. And so this gets us back to this idea of the legal concept of possession, custody, and control, especially in eDiscovery. So the Federal Rules of Procedure, this Rule 34 is about what parties can request in the discovery process. And it speaks to this idea of whatever information is within the party's possession, custody, or control. And so undoubtedly, if you have data that is held in the cloud for you, it is undoubtedly, undeniably within your control. So even though it's not necessarily in your possession, that legal concept, though it may be, it is certainly within your control. And so the idea of control is defined by your ability to get at it or to force somebody else to get at it. And so this extends not only to your cloud providers, but it's social media sites like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, if you have those corporate sites. These same kind of questions, the analysis around what control you have over the data, that's where your legal control extends as well. And so not only is this an eDiscovery issue, of course, but it's also an issue of information governance. And so the ability to get at data so that you know where it is, you know what's in it, and you can leverage it for your business, legal, and regulatory purposes is the whole idea behind information governance. What we see is often there are business reasons that a cloud computing solution is considered, whether that's an email solution like Microsoft 365 or Google Docs or Gmail for the enterprise, or it's just document repositories like Dropbox for the enterprise, Google Docs, things like that. Often it's a business consideration that is driving that, and we find that clients don't often consider the other IG purposes, the other facets of information governance with that, like privacy and security and eDiscovery. Because as we'll talk about a lot today, it's really easy to get your data into the cloud. It's a lot harder to get your data out of the cloud. And so understanding the whole life cycle of your information, including where it exists in the cloud, is one of the most important parts of an IG program. So what cloud repositories do is it changes our eDiscovery strategies a little bit. And so often most of our eDiscovery strategies, or what we call litigation response protocols, are very custodian driven. Typically we identify the custodians or the people at a company that are most involved in the subject of the litigation, and we figure out what data sources they have access to, and then what information is most likely to be in those sources to set up our litigation protocols or our ESI protocols. That's a little harder to do sometimes when you have cloud, especially collaborative cloud environments. And so figuring out a new way to approach relevancy of data, how to determine that relevancy and how to get at that data, you have to undertake the new way of thinking when you have cloud repositories. Same thing with the idea of metadata. Many of our ESI protocols are highly related or dependent upon metadata. So we're looking at file types and when things were last saved or when they were first created. And one problem is the metadata is different in the cloud. And so to the extent that we are used to having eDiscovery strategies that are driven by some of these metadata-related pieces of information, we have to change that. And so very often companies will go to the cloud with these older or more traditional views of eDiscovery protocols, like custodian-driven and metadata-driven, without realizing that those pieces aren't going to be there in these new cloud repositories. And so what becomes really important to do is redevelop your litigation response protocols and using the kind of the project management skills that all of us have developed in the eDiscovery circumstances, right? And so understanding that consistent, repeatable processes are really how you avoid problems with eDiscovery, and testing these processes in advance prior to having to test them out in the heat and pressure of litigation. So making sure that your company has a litigation response protocol that says when an event occurs that triggers my duty to preserve, like I get sued, here's the steps that I undertake each time, including understanding the people that are involved, what data they have access to, and how I can get that or find relevant data within those sources. If our processes are a little outdated, that they are reliant upon things like metadata, test to make sure that that metadata is still available in the cloud. What can I get access to? How can I search that data, identify what's relevant, and put it on hold? And then how do I get that data out? This is one of the things we'll talk about today, and this is where the technological solutions that have come into play here are really quite interesting to overcome some of the difficulties trying to get data out of the cloud. And so once your processes are tested and put in place, then it's all about keeping track of each of the steps that you do so you can defend your processes. Because eDiscovery is only going to become more complex as the variety of data repositories that we deal with continue to grow. And we kind of went from email and documents that, we kind of went into web pages and social media sites and text messaging, and now we're getting into these other cloud repositories, both email and document, and that's only going to continue. And so having eDiscovery processes that are well thought out that you follow each time, that's the way you really build up your defensibility, and also you don't leave things out of your process. And so what we're going to kind of focus on today is some of the technological solutions of that. Every company has some benefits they can get from cloud computing, and the economics behind it are really compelling. We have seen, even in the last 12 months, a huge uptick in the number of companies that are moving some data to the cloud, whether it's email or document repositories or things like Salesforce or other CRMs that are online. And so having data in the cloud is just the normal way of doing business and will increasingly become that way. Unfortunately, many of these solutions were built to satisfy the business purpose for which they are created, but they don't consider often sometimes things like privacy and security and eDiscovery. And so it's our job as legal practitioners and eDiscovery and IG practitioners to build those processes and protections into our regular eDiscovery and IG processes, because the same obligations apply to data no matter where it lives. And so some of what we see and this is all transition over to Jan, is that so once you've got your data in these repositories, how then do you get it out? This is one of the biggest problems. How do you find it, search it, and then how do you deal with it in our normal eDiscovery workflow? And that's what Jan will be talking about for the next few slides here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Bennet. Yeah. there's a couple of different scenarios and a couple of different setups that we've seen with our clients when they use cloud computing. But one of the major issues is influenced by, of course, the fact that you do not always exactly know where your cloud data is, and you're depending on internet connections, which can be kind of unpredictable, especially if they go over a wide area network. What we see a lot here in Europe once in a while is that as soon as the United States wakes up, the entire internet performance goes down, which is around 3 p.m. for us and 9 a.m. Eastern time. And I think, yeah, thank you. No worries. We just go home and have a beer. Yeah. But we see the same. You probably see the same in the U.S. And in other areas where bandwidth capacity sometimes is limited and it's unpredictable. A lot of companies are trying to agree on service level agreements with their cloud providers, trying to demand or trying to negotiate higher level of response or servability or assistance when they need to collect data or transfer very large amounts of data between different servers or different locations. But as a small company or even as a large company, it's not always easy to negotiate these type of service level agreements to your full satisfaction. Recent developments in safe harbor requirements also from the European Court of Justice have made things even more complex. And then there's also local jurisdictions which are different for different states, different areas, different countries, and this all influences what you have to deal with when you're considering cloud computing. Now, what we see in general is there's three solutions once people have to deal with very large data collections or eDiscovery from the cloud related to either regulatory requests or federal rules of civil procedure, or maybe internal investigations or other obligations where they have to share data to any third party. The first scenario is more like the classic approach where the eDiscovery solution runs on premises, or there's a service provider who operates from their own data center, and then they're going to collect data from the cloud and bring it down. Now, because most cloud solutions do not have the advanced search and the fidelity of search that's required by, or which is like more or less the golden standard in eDiscovery, including what Bennet just discussed, the metadata, or maybe like compound file formats, complex file formats, encrypted files, embedded files, you name it. And so what they do is they just collect entire mailboxes, and they will bring them down, and then on-premise they start processing all this data and start unpacking it and doing all the forensic work and deduplication and everything. And of course, before you've downloaded, well, for instance, 1,000 or even more mailboxes, where the average mailbox these days is 5 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes, depending on what kind of a company it is, you're talking about tremendous amounts of data, and this is really slowing down the whole eDiscovery process. The second scenario makes more sense, and this is where you deploy a full in-house eDiscovery solution in the cloud, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail. And then you can do the whole forensic processing, collection, preservation, everything in the cloud, to deal with all the metadata, do everything the way it's supposed to be done. Do your deduplication, do your processing, do your analytics, do your first review in the cloud, remove, for instance, the most non-relevant documents, and then do a production or download only the relevant data which you need to disclose to a third party, which is often a small percentage of the data which is collected from all the mailboxes in the first scenario. And this scenario makes much more sense. And then, because a lot of clients or a lot of organizations these days have, of course, both cloud resources and on-premises solutions and resources, it makes sense if you are a larger organization and you have email and file shares and SharePoint in the cloud, and then you have maybe like a content management repository, other file systems, other transactional systems on premises, then you can also take a combined approach where you use eDiscovery tools in the cloud for your cloud resources, and you use on-premises eDiscovery solution for all of your on-premises solution. Okay, now why is it a preferred solution to run these eDiscovery processes in the cloud? Now, looking at it from a little distance is why bring large volumes of data down when you can do identification, collection, preservation, processing, and your initial review in the cloud. It just doesn't make sense. You don't want to depend on these large, unpredictable, wide area network problems. And why do you want to maintain, again, a large on-premises data center to manage all these collections when you just moved all these resources to the cloud? And finally, what we see is most cases settle or only require small productions in the whole eDiscovery process before, and it's only a very few one that really go to court. And there is some eDiscovery always in the process, but it's often a small percentage of the original data that needs to be preserved. So what's in the cloud should stay in the cloud, and that should make much more sense.
And Jan, just to provide a just to give my perspective on this, this is a huge problem. Like when we have lots and lots of clients who have gone to 365, especially or Google Docs, or Gmail for enterprise, things like that, and it's really difficult to get large volumes of data out of those back down to on-prem to use your eDiscovery software for. It often takes days and days sometimes. You have all kinds of download issues at times. So this has been one of the problems that we've been wrestling with for some time.
And these collections that you do, what's like, if you're talking about days and days, is that like a terabyte or already with 100 gigabyte? Or
oh no, even the smaller ones. So even getting down to where you're dealing with small gigabyte portions, even 50 or 100 gig can be really difficult depending on how your network is set up.
Yeah, no, we've heard a lot of these stories, and we're trying to collect some data on numbers, and because it's very easy to get data in the cloud for whatever reason, but if you want to get it out, things supposedly are much harder. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about these why this can be the case, and what we see is that let's take a look at Microsoft Azure because that's one of the mostly used cloud solutions, and a lot of companies, especially for the Office 365 environments. Now what you see is that like a wide area network, a WAN, it can be like across 200 miles, 1,000 miles, and there can be all kind of unpredictable behavior in between of your data center and where you are, and also depending on the heavy traffic, depending on the moment of day, it can become even slower. Now what we see with Microsoft Azure is that we run these virtual machines with our eDiscovery software in Azure, and if they're running the same in the client's environment, then they will run in the same Office 365 tenancy. So there is no WAN, there is no wide area network. Everything is done on the high-speed local area network of that particular Azure location. And with Azure, when you start using Azure, you can indicate which geographical region you want your Azure installation to run in. And as a result, you can use the bandwidth between Azure and the Office 365 within your own environment, which is extremely high. So this is a major advantage in addition of Microsoft Azure. I don't know how this is with AWS and Google, but I presume that there's probably similar setups possible where you can deploy servers in each other's vicinity if that's what you want. Now let's take a step back and look at the ZyLAB platform, and why is it possible to run the ZyLAB platform, and why is it so easy to run the ZyLAB platform in cloud solutions? Now, first of all, we've always been in this area where we've been able to collect from SharePoint, on-premises, all the versions, everything's out there, including all the metadata, all the project data, all the hidden data. We can collect from network folders, email servers, not only different servers like the Microsoft, but also other types of servers. We can collect from various repositories, and we've always been able to collect from the cloud. And then we can take all these data, and typically this is used in applications like eDiscovery, according to the EDRM model, regulatory response, internal investigations, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and Public Records Act, also a major area of concern, compliance monitoring, supervision, or just like archiving and data cleanup. And in all of these cases, we've had this on-premises solution, this enterprise software, which allows you to import, transform, and then deal with all the things that Bennet also talked about, which are very important in eDiscovery, like auditing, like security, like reproducibility, like for our Europeans also very important privacy and data protection, and we've all these different functionalities in our products. Now, when we designed this product a couple of years ago, we created it along a virtual architecture. This means that instead of installing our software directly on the hardware, we can also install it on hardware where there's a virtual layer in between. And what we did when we designed this software is we kind of solved these problems with our clients, where with eDiscovery and large data collections, you never really know how much you're going to get, and you never know quite exactly what you're going to get. It could be like a lot of data in a foreign language you need to translate with machine translation. Or it could be that there's a lot of data which contains audio. You want to do audio searching. Or maybe it's like PSTs or Lotus Notes NSF containers you need to unpack. Maybe there's a lot of TIFFs you need to OCR. So there's all these additional processing requirements where one day you need to do a lot of this, and the other day you need to do a lot of that. So what we did, we created this cluster architecture where we can deploy any of our collectors, any of our processors, or one or more different virtual machines, and then what we do is we can assign a whole pool of IP addresses or individual IP addresses to these different nodes in our system, and the system can then use the capacity, or it can also distribute the capacity as it needs it. And this makes it very, very elastical, very, very flexible architecture. In a way, it's so flexible. Once we've installed our software in such an environment, we can add additional capacity without the need to reinstall the software, or without the need to relocate or share or spread or split up the data. So it's extremely powerful. Now, this is exactly the same architecture that's used in the cloud. So when Azure and AWS and Google became more and more popular, we saw clients starting to install our software in these clouds next to our installations on premises, or with clients using private clouds. Some of our clients just use it on PCs using Oracle VirtualBox or other tools. But the last, I think it was 2 years, 2 years, we started seeing all these Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services deployments. And so what we did is we created these virtual machines, as you can see here in the Azure workspace. And in our software, we recommend to set up the software with at least 2 virtual machines, or 2, where one is dealing with the collection and processing, which is highly CPU intensive, but you have very little user interaction, and it's also typically done by IT. And then we have a second virtual machine which runs the legal review and the production, which is typically done by larger groups of attorneys who are reviewing the data, redacting it, and organizing the data. Now, so we have curated these 2 existing virtual machines in Azure, and what we can do is we can do these type of installations in less than an hour. Where we tell the system, well, we would like to use like 1 or 2 machines. The machines, we would like to have one machine with 4 cores and 16 gigabytes, another machine with 8 cores and 32 gigabytes, and this is what you just all deploy in Azure, and then you tell the system to use these virtual machine images that we deployed from ZyLAB, and then it will automatically deploy these images with this vanilla kind of image. Now, on this image is all of our software. It's pre-configured. It's ready to run, and then all you need to do is just connect to your data locations in the cloud. So you can use our standard software. You can connect to your file shares, to your SharePoint online, to your Exchange online, whatever you have. And I've seen installations being done like in including the full setup of the virtual machines in like 45 minutes, an hour. And then if you want to add additional processing capacity, it's really easy. All you do is you say, well, I don't need like one cluster with 4 cores. I want to have like another, I want to have another node in my cluster, or maybe I want to have 5 other nodes in your cluster. Just add them, and it will take about 15 minutes before Azure has deployed them in the background. And you can very easily double, triple, or multiply the capacity in your system. So this is really easy. There's a couple of other very interesting benefits. It's very easy to connect to these locations in the cloud because there's just one interface. It's not as hard as connecting on premises. So also from an eDiscovery point of view, it's really much easier. We've done this with several of our clients. We also have some of our partners who provide litigation support and practical solutions for information governance challenges for law firms and Fortune 1000 companies. And they also see that it's very easy for them to deploy an installation for their clients based on our software in Azure. They don't have to go on premise. They can just set it up and build this ZyLAB eDiscovery production system and link it to the data resources of the different clients, and then they can, whenever there's an eDiscovery, they can collect the data and they can run their managed services. We provide the software also with legal hold, and it's a very easy, very quick way for them to start providing services. So this is more or less a quick overview, and we just focused primarily on the connection to the cloud. Should you be interested in like a more detailed overview of our eDiscovery functionality, you should either go to our website, and we were recently selected by Gartner as the #1 provider in the industry for software which covers the full EDRM, eDiscovery reference model. And we're very, very proud of that. And if you want, you can download it, or if you are interested in a demo, we'll show you a quick demo. We gave you a demo last week, right, Bennet? And,
yes, and honestly, Jan, this is where I'm not sure. So I'm not sure people truly understand how completely revolutionary this is. And so, this is one of the biggest problems that we face as more and more of our clients have data in the cloud. Whether it's social media sites, SharePoint sites, email, doc repositories, this basically takes all of the benefits and elasticity of the cloud and extends it to your eDiscovery. And so, for instance, like we just have today, we have a client who has Office 365 where we have to collect from like 15 custodians from the cloud and from those 365 accounts. And our traditional ways of, normally would go pull their entire email box and put it up into our review and analytical tools so we can slice and dice on our side. And that's just really hard to do with 365 accounts. You can connect to them and you can get the data, but it's much more difficult to get data out of the cloud than it is from on-prem solutions. So basically what ZyLAB does is allow me to literally set up an instance with their virtual machines right beside where my data is. And so I can point to all these different data sources from a dashboard that I can use from logging into from anywhere. point to these things, and it is just lightning fast to be able to pull data from these various sources. And it obviates me having to move stuff out of the cloud onto prem, move it to a vendor or wherever my software is, analyze it there, and produce it. All of that step is just taken away. I go straight from collection through processing and up to review and analysis in less than an hour. It's really quite something.
Yeah. Oh, and if you have your own review tool, which you prefer, we can also do productions from our review, so you can take a look and, like, for instance, remove the spam or other stuff where upfront this is really not relevant, and then just do a production with different batches or different groups of documents into any type of format, concordance, EDRM, XML, or any of the other industry standard formats, and all you do is you download that data, which is just a small percentage of the rest of the data.
Yeah.
There's a couple of really interesting questions in the
so why don't we get to this, guys? We have a few questions showing up in the chat function, and there's some other ones I think we want to talk about. So Jan, why don't we start with this one? A question from Michael, which is, does your solution include the option to perform a search of the intranet for local storage locations? That is, the ability to locate network share locations or local cloud connections. Can you speak to that one?
Yeah. Well, we do have and this also is actually interesting in connection with the other question from Walter Borfus, if I pronounce it correctly. It's what we have is the history of ZyLAB is that we started many years ago as a company providing search software, and we also have some very, very solid information management tools which do not only allow one to archive data in open formats which are accepted by the National Archives. For instance, one of our clients is the Executive Office of the President, who has about 1 billion messages now in our software in an open file format, which is accepted by the National Archives. And all of that is searchable, and we do that by storing all this information in an open XML file format in a file system, which we can then search with our search technology. Now we can do exactly the same with data which resides in the cloud. If you have a file system, we can make that searchable, or we can also work with search engines of other providers or search tools that are used in the cloud. For instance, when we do a collection from Exchange, we can do a collection by just collecting date ranges or mailboxes or other metadata, but we can also do collections where we use keywords, so we don't collect or we don't over-collect. We just collect very focused on what we can do. And we can do the same also in other repositories, and definitely with on-premise and also cloud-based file repositories. I hope that answers the question.
Well, excellent. Another question we had, Bennet, I think this is one for you, is you talked about some of the complexities of dealing with myriad cloud providers and so on. And are there model contracts or organizations like the ABA, American Bar Association, and others working on legal frameworks for engaging with cloud providers? I mean, what's going on in that space?
Yes, so that's a great question. Because the contracts with your cloud providers really are quite important about how you can get data out, things like privacy and security. At the beginning of when cloud was becoming popular, even 3 and 4 years ago, it was very difficult to get provisions around security and privacy, accessibility, SLAs, service level agreements about getting your data out or what that data looked like when you got it out. But the cloud providers have become much more sensitive to this because they realized that these were things that were blocking a wider implementation of the cloud. And so what you're seeing with this large kind of uptick in going to the cloud is a lot of the response from the cloud providers in having these kinds of things in their contracts. There are the American Bar Association has a cloud computing committee, which I'm one of the co-chairs of, that has we've had a couple of webinars on this that we have some good model language. There's also several resources out there about kind of model cloud computing contract either clauses or things to be aware of. And please feel free to email me and I'll send those things out and put you in touch with the right folks. The cautionary tale there is the reason why the cloud is so inexpensive is because the cloud providers provide the same solution to a bunch of different people, and so it's kind of like mass production. So the more you tweak those contracts, the more customized it becomes, so the more expensive it can become. But fortunately, a lot of these eDiscovery and security and privacy provisions are being included. The best way that the cloud providers have started to really deal with eDiscovery and information governance is through open APIs. The ability, like ZyLAB has built, the ability to get at these cloud repositories. And that's really where you see most of the cloud solutions going, is allowing solutions like ZyLAB to get into those repositories and be able to do your eDiscovery and IG in those other areas.
Right, right. Excellent. So that sounds like there's some good resources there that folks can look at as they push out into the space. Another question, I think, for you, Jan, as a follow-up is, what's your experience been in terms of, the courts or regulators looking at your solution, and any concerns around spoliation? I think that we've certainly seen lots of discussion around this idea that as data flows through a system or is perhaps transmogrified as it goes from one system to another, does it affect its evidentiary value? I mean, what's your experience there been?
Yeah, well, the first part of the answer is that many of the regulators use our software. So we have a lot of regulators worldwide using our technology for data collection and review and processing and searching. I was at a conference beginning of this week, a forensic technology conference, and there were a lot of forensic experts there, and everybody is highly concerned, of course, about the cloud, and they cannot make like a disk image of a cloud storage or cloud repository, so they're looking at other ways. And we work with, like I said, many of these regulators. And what we do in our software, when we collect data from the original repositories to a preservation area in the cloud. And then when we do this collection, we actually assign hash values to it, and we store everything in a read-only format. There's a whole chain of custody for everything that's going out. And then one of the really interesting features of our technology is that once we've done a collection, we can go back to the same mailbox or the same data location like every 24 hours or every hour, and also do automatic recollections. So, and everything which is collected, because we do not do in-place legal hold, but whatever data is collected at a certain moment in time, that data is preserved, hashed, and kept forever. So, we try to do whatever is possible to prevent spoliation. And then again, the really good thing is a lot of these regulators use our technology. There's a lot of case law around our technology, not only in the United States, but also a lot of international case law. Our technology has been used with the war crimes tribunals forever, and that's a big benefit.
So let's I think that's a good pivot over to Bennet. I mean, I guess Bennet, in the you see these eDiscovery battles as they shape up and as they're fought, and do you see judges or the other side of the D sort of looking askew at data just because it comes from the cloud, or what's happening in that space?
It's really quite the opposite. It's interesting that we've got enough experience, 10 years into the eDiscovery revolution, in 2006 when the federal rules were first amended, where people were very hesitant about even search terms. Remember those days when we were worried about search terms and how do I know that it's actually finding the stuff when I use that term? We've come a very long way till now where, advanced analytics are de rigueur, right? I mean, this is just, in fact, people who don't use analytics are just putting themselves at an incredible strategic disadvantage. And we've had enough experience now with moving data around that it's the moving of data that is really causing the problem. And moving it through multiple pieces of software and processing in one and putting up in another, reviewing in another. And so the fewer transition points between the data sources is actually more trusted. One thing that's really interesting with ZyLAB, it is widely used by a lot of the regulators. And so what's interesting is you can actually do productions directly to the regulators so that your data never leaves the cloud. Like it literally goes from where you've collected it from your 365 or Dropbox or wherever it is into one of these virtual machines that ZyLAB spins up that I can also elasticize, right? So if I start with like 3 custodians, I'm going to have a little box, and then all of a sudden I've got 22 more. I can augment those boxes, those virtual machines, to handle that load. And then when I'm ready to produce, it just spits a load file directly to the cloud instance of the regulators. And so your actual chain of control and chain of custody is so much more streamlined. It's just taking away these huge transaction costs of physically moving data around when it's all cloud-based.
Because normally you have to document all of those, right? You have to, when you have these transactions from the cloud, on premises to your service bureau, to a law firm, and then back, and then you do production. These are all disclosures and document movements and data movements you have to document. You have to provide all kind of reports to make sure that everything's right. Right, Bennet?
Yes, exactly. I mean, imagine the days. There's still times when you have to actually send a hard drive by FedEx. Right? Yeah. Tell me that is any more, the security around that is just, it should keep you awake at night compared to securely transferring something around the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should just skip all those steps and just have the regulators host the data for us right from the beginning.
Well, this is actually something that we discussed where we're actually looking at providing such a service to make it much easier, because this is a major problem, and we are one of the very few, if not only, solution out there. That's something that crossed our mind as well.
There's an interesting discussion that we've been having here online about a couple of issues. And you did touch on them already on, so let's come back to them, but it's a discussion about sort of long-term retrievability of email and other forms of evidence, which of course is really important to organizations like the National Archives who have a mandate in many cases to keep this stuff literally forever and make sure it's available. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you kind of a more fundamental question. And, it's fascinating with, you still have, and no doubt this, you bang your head against the wall with this all the time, is you still have people who will say, well, the cloud isn't secure, right? So, what I'm curious about is that if you look across your client base, your customers, is there a characteristic that defines those customers who are most comfortable with using the cloud? Is there why are some companies comfortable with it? They're using it for this incredibly important, in some cases, bet the farm kind of litigations, and some who aren't. What do you see there? And I find that
the litigation part, normally they don't really think about that in a sense.
Right.
That kind of happens to them
Nothing's
later.
Happening. They don't know what. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very. We have our cloud clients are very different. It's like counties. It's cities. It's smaller cities, larger counties. It's organizations that have a very distributed, presence across the country. So it's like retail shops or people with a lot of employees all over the place. It makes so much sense to bring this data, retailers, into the cloud. And from a security point of view, I think a lot of people were not they weren't very comfortable about this, but you can buy different types of cloud solutions these days. You can buy encrypted servers. If you want it secure, you can get it secure. Will you pay a little bit more? You can have encrypted bandwidth, but in many cases it's more secure than having a server in your own office somewhere in a closet, which is unpredicted, and anybody who walks in can just take it and walk away with it. And so I think that more and more people, I read a Gartner report the other day which predicted that right now 5% of all organizations are in Azure or in other cloud solutions, and they expect in the next 18 months to go, I don't know the exact numbers, but what I remembered was something like 20-25% going into the cloud.
Yeah.
And
we see the same thing, Jan. It's security used to be a real concern, and it's just not. Partially because we keep seeing companies who are supposedly ultra secure constantly getting hacked, and so there's the people who run these cloud, especially the more professional cloud organizations, they are highly focused on security, because not only do they have a need to sell these solutions, but they also have liability involved. And so, as Jan said, you can really dial up the amount of security you want to where you've got multi-directional encryption and all. I mean, so even if someone gets the stream, they can't get it. I mean, there's all kinds of security you can put on. But even on the most basic setup, it's actually quite hard to get at that data. And so security has, while it's still quite important, it's not as much of a barrier as we've seen. In fact, quite the opposite.
Well, and I think, Bennet, right, I mean, that goes to your earlier point about, should every company be in the business of generating its own electricity, as you said at the beginning. And I think, as you say, Jan, I mean, in many of these companies, the ubiquity of the cloud is such that it's not even something that's considered as odd or unusual or something that requires special justification. Now, one of the questions I wanted to get to, guys, while we still have time, and Jan, you touched on it briefly, but for anyone who pays attention to this space, we all know that the placid lake that was supposedly representing the safe harbor between the U.S. and the EU around the transfer of private data from EU countries to the U.S. kind of blew up in the last few weeks. And so I'm curious from either of you, what do you think the impact of that is on eDiscovery in the cloud? I mean, clearly, one of the things the cloud can do theoretically is make invisible to the user where the data actually resides. It becomes irrelevant. But in the context of the legal framework around private data in the EU, which effectively prevents citizens' private data from being moved to countries that don't have equivalent protections, if the U.S. doesn't in the EU's judgment, that's illegal. So now location matters. So what's the effect of that when you start to talk about doing collections and so on across borders?
Well, and this is what makes cloud solutions like ZyLAB so efficient, because you can spin up an instance of their software wherever you want, including in a data center in the EU, so that you're collecting from data in the EU, keeping it in the EU, and then your reviewers are actually connecting to the review tool that is in the EU. And so even your privilege reviews, I saw there was a question here about doing reviews. Well, ZyLAB has one of the very best review tools as well. This isn't just a collection and analysis tool. And so you can actually do your review, code for privilege, code for relevancy, decide what to produce, and only that production goes to wherever you're sending it. And so you can route your data to or from or away from different jurisdictions in the cloud. And actually, especially with all that's going on with the EU data privacy and the safe harbor regime being really dismantled temporarily, it actually gives you much more flexibility than we once had.
Yeah. Well, I fully agree, and that's also what we see. We already, in Europe, companies are already requiring that they know where the data is, whether it's in Germany or France or Switzerland, and then if that's where your data is, the same virtual machine architecture can also run in a private cloud or in a local data center. And I think this is, instead of taking everything on premise, it's much more logical also to do your review in that particular jurisdiction under the particular privacy rules and data protection rules that apply in that jurisdiction. And like you said, Bennet, thank you very much. That's exactly what we provide in our solution, including auto redaction and rules for different redactions and different privacy regulations, including HIPAA and PII and PHI type of provisions, which we can automatically detect during the review.
Excellent. Well, we're coming up near the top of the hour, so let me just take care of some housekeeping. And while I'm doing that, guys, just think about, I'd just like to ask people, what's the one most important piece of advice you would give to practitioners who are considering this, their approach to eDiscovery, incorporating the cloud, and how it fits into their overall approach. A recording of today's webinar will be made available at the link that you see here within a few days. Certainly we welcome you to go and check out our community right now, where we have a lot of fabulous resources, including our just published annual report, which is about 60 pages of infographics and analysis of what's happening in the world of information governance. But you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recording of that of today's webinar. So look for that. So as we close, Jan, just give us your thoughts. What is kind of the most important piece of advice that you think you can pass on to the folks listening in today?
Well, I think there's a lot of organizations that are going into massive negotiations with cloud providers to get service level agreements that fit the traditional way of doing eDiscovery. And I think what I hope people learn today is that that's no longer necessary. You know, there's tools out there, very affordable tools that you can purchase and very soon also download through the marketplace of Microsoft Azure. That you can immediately use to do your eDiscovery, and then you don't have to worry that much about service level agreements and downloading and high bandwidth and all kind of other issues.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Jan. And Bennet, so what are your final thoughts in terms of, you're someone who's dealing with this stuff every day. You're seeing your clients work with it, and as you said earlier in our discussion, we've come a long way in the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 5 years, and the last 2 years, and we're in a very different place as it relates to the challenge that eDiscovery represents. But what have you learned that you want to share as a closing thought?
When I saw this solution from ZyLAB, I even said to Jan, I said, this is the future, right? That us having to deal with moving data around to deal with it is just very archaic and is error prone, and it causes all kinds of friction in the transaction costs of doing eDiscovery and information governance. And so the idea of having a tool that I can literally almost instantaneously put wherever my data is, whether it's a third-party data center, whether it's like my 365 or AWS instance, or even on-prem, the fact that I've got the ability to put that software wherever it most makes sense and take it back down. Like if I have an on-prem engagement, a matter that has a bunch of on-prem data, and then I've got something that is in the cloud, I can change that. I can spin down one machine and spin up another. So the flexibility that it gives you in the eDiscovery space, but also the IG space, the fact that the visibility that we get into this data to find stuff that's relevant to a case or an investigation, the same kind of insights give you information governance options about data remediation, what you're keeping, what you're classifying, what you're throwing away. And so it's all about getting visibility into the data in the cleanest way possible. It opens up all these possibilities for you. Legally, what you care about is purposely considering where your data lives so that you can control it properly for all of your legal obligations. Whether it's regulatory record-keeping stuff, whether it's privacy stuff with HIPAA or PCI or EU data privacy, personal information, or eDiscovery obligations, purposely thinking through where your data lives, how you're going to get at it, and how you can leverage it for these legal requirements is really what the future of ED and IG are. And this is where we're seeing technology going to help you address that.
Excellent. Thanks, Bennet. Well, as I said at the outset of this webinar, it's part of a series webinars that we've been doing with ZyLAB and will continue to do. And I think that's a really interesting potential topic, is that you have a lot of organizations, like you said, Bennet, who have invested heavily in an infrastructure and a capability to do eDiscovery. But guess what? Now all of a sudden you actually have this capability to do some other really interesting things with your data. You have the knowledge of how to work with the data, and you have these tools for automation and analysis at your disposal that you can point at different problems, which I think would make a great topic for another webinar. And I'm sure it's something that we'll talk about and cover. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I hope you found it informative and useful. As I said in the chat, we will, and earlier, that we will make available recording of the webinar, so look for that in your email in the next couple of days, and then look for our next webinar. We love putting together smart people to talk about these problems, and both sort of what's happening right on the edge of innovation and also what's emerging as best practices. So thank you very much, and I hope the rest of the day is great. They tell me that I need to tell you to please disconnect your lines, and also might as well say be kind, rewind. It seems like kind of in the zone of that sort of advice. So, thank you very much, ZyLAB, and for supporting the ICI and for putting together a great program. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.